The microphones were already hot when the first shot was fired, in the echoing chamber of the Oversight Committee. With C-SPAN's red light blinking and every cable network tuned in, the tension didn't walk in, it slammed the door behind it. Suits shuffled under desks. And behind the lacquered wooden bench, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat in calm silence. Lips slightly parted, eyes trained forward like she already knew what storm was coming. Pam Bondi didn't bother with pleasantries. "Representative Crockett," she began, her voice wrapped in courtroom authority and performative sweetness. "Given your party's repeated attempts to downplay the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop, I have to ask, what exactly are you trying to protect?" A few chuckles from the Republican side. Camera operators panned left, zoomed in. The bait had been cast. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she adjusted the mic with slow precision, then leaned in just enough for her voice to land like a stone. "In Stillwater, I'm sorry," she said, eyes locked on Bondi. "What does Hunter Biden have to do with me?" The air froze. Bondi blinked. One beat. Two. The room, once bustling with whispered legal strategy and backbench gossip, turned still. Behind Crockett, an aide stiffened but said nothing. Even the chairman stopped rifling through his notes. "I've never met the man," Jasmine continued. "I've never spoken to him. I don't hold his bank account, his emails, or his demons. And yet here I sit on live television being asked to account for a private citizen's sins, not by the Department of Justice, but by you." Her voice didn't rise. It deepened, and that she said, her eyes narrowing slightly, "tells me everything I need to know about your priorities today." A ripple swept through the room, invisible, electric. Somewhere a clip had already been cut. Somewhere else a headline was being written. Pam Bondi tried to respond. She couldn't, because Jasmine Crockett had just flipped the trial and she wasn't the one on defense anymore. Pam Bondi smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but like someone who had practiced this moment in the mirror a dozen times. A former Florida Attorney General and cable news regular, she didn't need a courtroom to prosecute. The hearing chamber was enough. The lighting was better, the stakes higher, and the audience ... infinite. She shifted in her seat, casually laying a binder on the table in front of her, tabbed, color-coded, prepared not for clarity, but for spectacle. "Congresswoman Crockett," Bondi said again, this time slower. "With all due respect, Hunter Biden's conduct is not a sideshow. It goes to the heart of transparency, of ethics, of foreign influence in the Biden family." The word family landed with weight. Intentionally, she flipped open the binder, pretending to consult it, but she already knew the script. The talking points rolled out like pearls on a string. Ukraine, China, millions moved through shell companies. Text suggesting connections to the big guy. The American people deserve to know who is profiting off the name of the president. Whispers moved across the benches. Cameras clicked. Reporters began scribbling. This was red meat, and Bondi knew exactly how much to bleed. She lifted a printed email one, already posted on every right-wing media site in the country, and held it like a crucifix. "This email," she said, "was found on the laptop. It references a meeting with a Chinese executive, allegedly involving Hunter Biden, and possibly Jasmine raised a single hand, palm forward. "No," she said quietly, but with a tone that made the word feel like a door slamming shut. Pam hesitated. A flicker of irritation broke through the practiced calm. "No," she repeated, forced smile straining. "No," Jasmine said again, firmer. "If you want to prosecute Hunter Biden, call him. Subpoena him. Put him in this chair and ask him every question your party has rehearsed for 5 years." She paused. "Let it settle. But I won't serve as his surrogate for your soundbite." Bondi tried to recover, waving the binder in the air like it still held authority. "These are legitimate questions, no?" Jasmine cut in, eyes blazing now. "These are recycled headlines. This isn't a deposition. This is a deflection." The room was listening now, not just hearing, but listening. Democrats leaned in, finally alert. Even a few Republicans stopped checking their phones. Jasmine shifted in her chair, same way a boxer does before the counterpunch. "You're not here to uncover truth. You're here to make a clip, something your network buddies can run on." a loop tonight while ignoring your party's silence on Jared Kushner's $2 billion Saudi deal. Bondi stiffened. And you know what's worse than hypocrisy? Jasmine asked, not waiting for an answer. Cowardice. Dressing up a personal vendetta as public concern. Pam's jaw tightened. She flipped a page, tried to find her footing. Jasmine folded her hands and leaned back, reclaiming time and space with a calm that pierced deeper than volume. You brought a binder. I brought facts. If we're done with the theater, maybe we can move on to actual governance. Gasps. A stifled laugh. Even the chairman blinked, caught between decorum and disbelief. Pam Bondi, for the first time in a long while, had nothing to say because Jasmine Crockett had made something painfully clear. The prosecution had no case. The air in the chamber was no longer still. It was thick, dense with unspoken challenge. The kind of silence that doesn't invite calm, but confrontation. Pam Bondi glanced down at her notes again, but the pages no longer offered reassurance. Her binder, so crisp and weaponized when the hearing began, now felt like armor that didn't fit. She cleared her throat, fishing for one last arrow. I'm simply pointing out, she said carefully, that the American people deserve to know. What kind of access and favors may have been granted under your party's leadership? But Jasmine Crockett wasn't listening to the performance anymore. She was watching the room, watching the Republicans grin and nod, watching the cameras inch forward, watching how easily the narrative had twisted. She knew this tactic, knew the setup. The goal wasn't to land a punch. The goal was to bait her into throwing one. She leaned forward, not to lash out, but to unravel the premise. I was elected to represent the people of Texas's 30th district, she said, voice low but unwavering. They sent me here to fight for health care, jobs, voting rights, not to become a prop in your party's morality play. Bondi opened her mouth, but Jasmine didn't pause. You're asking me to answer for someone else's behavior. Private? Citizen. A man I've never met, whose legal issues are under federal review by a prosecutor your party appointed. She scanned the dais. Her voice rose, but not in anger and clarity. I am not on trial. This is not a courtroom. End of it. Where your evidence would be tossed before lunch? Laughter, audible, uncomfortable. Bondi blinked fast, lips parting in protest, but Jasmine wasn't done. Let's say it plain. What you're doing isn't oversight. It's obsession. You've turned this committee into a media event. One where guilt is assumed, innocence is irrelevant, and distraction is the headline. She turned now not just toward Bondi, but to the cameras lining the back wall. And for the record, she said, you're not asking these questions because you care about transparency. You're asking them because you're hoping I'll slip. You're betting that a black woman with a microphone will become your next viral moment. A stunned hush fell over the chamber. Bondi looked toward the chair, silently appealing for intervention, but none came. No one dared interrupt now. Jasmine leaned back, exhaled, then added almost softly, but I'm not here for your moment. I'm here for mine. The words hung in the air like a gavel strike. It wasn't just a response. It was a reorientation. Bondi had tried to write her into the narrative as a side character, a foil for someone else's scandal. Instead, Jasmine had seized the pen and rewritten the scene entirely. Across social media, the clips were already trending. Hashtags blooming, captions writing themselves. I'm not on trial. Jasmine Crockett shuts it down. But in the hearing room there were no hashtags, just stunned silence, followed by the subtle shift of political gravity. Committee members began to realize the witness wasn't the story anymore. She was the standard, and Pam Bondi, once the one leading the questioning, now sat wordless, a prosecutor without control of the courtroom. The silence was broken only when the chairman, reluctant but forced, cleared his throat and said, Congresswoman Crockett's time has expired. But everyone knew that moment wasn't going to expire anytime soon. There was a stillness in Pam Bondi's body now, not poise, not control, but a kind of internal bracing. The kind you see in courtroom veterans when they realize the cross-examination is slipping away from them. She hadn't expected Jasmine to hold the line. She hadn't expected her to walk through fire and drag the spotlight behind her. And she certainly hadn't expected what came next. The chairman had barely yielded the floor. When Jasmine leaned in again, no performance, no drama, just a single page of printed paper in her hand and the calm tone of a woman loading bullets into facts. "You keep bringing up this laptop," she said, "so let's talk about it. Not as a headline, not as a weapon, but as what it actually is." Bondi frowned, wary. "This so-called laptop from hell, do you know how it got to the press? Through Rudy Giuliani? A man under multiple investigations, who handed it to the New York Post just days before an election? No chain of custody, no metadata integrity, no forensic trail." She let the list hit like hammer strokes. The FBI wouldn't touch it without analysis. Even the Post's own reporters raised concerns about its authenticity. They refused to put their names on the story. And yet this, she lifted the page slightly. "This is what you're using. To accuse me by association?" A few heads turned on the Republican bench. "I work in law," Jasmine continued. "And in law, if you bring in tainted evidence with no chain of custody, it's not just inadmissible, it can sink your entire case." She tapped her fingers lightly against the paper, controlled but loaded. But somehow, this hearing has turned an unverified hard drive, full of unauthenticated documents, into gospel. And the people watching from home, they're never told the whole story. They're told half-truths and forced to make whole conclusions. Bondi tried to interject too late. "I'm not here to protect Hunter Biden," Jasmine said. "I'm here to protect the truth from being manipulated into something ugly, into something dishonest, into a weapon pointed at the wrong people." She now turned directly to Bondi, voice soft but sharper than ever. "And let me ask you something. If this committee is so obsessed with foreign influence through presidential family members, where's the subpoena for Jared Kushner, who walked out of the White House with $2 billion in Saudi investments, or Ivanka Trump, who secured dozens of Chinese trademarks while standing behind her father in the Oval Office?" Bondi's lips parted, but no sound came. "The silence is noted," Jasmine said, folding the paper once and sliding it neatly into her folder. The room was dead quiet. There were no shouts, no rebuttals, just an awareness, a slow, creeping awareness, that the very foundation of this line of questioning had crumbled beneath Bondi's feet. Then Jasmine delivered the final blow. Not shouted, not dramatic, but clinical. "Even if the laptop is 100% authentic, none of it implicates me for this hearing's topic. So I'll ask again, what exactly does any of this have to do with me?" Pam Bondi stared ahead, her shoulders tense, her hands motionless on the table. She was no longer prosecuting. She was watching the jury turn, and the jury wasn't in the chamber. It was online. It was tweeting. It was choosing sides in real time. And Jasmine Crockett had just turned the case on its head. The pause after Jasmine's last question wasn't silence. It was vacancy. As if the room itself had just remembered it was supposed to mean something. "Pam." Bondi glanced around, searching for support, for nods, smirks, the subtle affirmations that usually lined her path like breadcrumbs. But there was none, not even from her side. She was a lawyer without a witness. A sword fighter whose opponent had tossed the blade and started speaking in language. Jasmine leaned forward again, not out of aggression, but control. The kind of a steady presence that doesn't need volume to command a room. "I've sat through enough of these hearings to know what this is," she said. "It's not oversight. It's not lawmaking. It's performance." She gestured lightly around the chamber. "Every one of us knows the cameras are on. We know the sound bites are being cut. The headlines are already drafted. And we also know this hearing will do nothing to materially help the people who put us in these chairs." Pam shifted uncomfortably. Jasmine's eyes didn't leave her. "Hunter Biden is under federal investigation by a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney who's been allowed to stay in office specifically to avoid conflict of interest. That's how the system is supposed to work independently." She turned toward the panel, letting her voice climb, but only slightly. "So I have to ask, why are we here? Dragging his name through a public circus when the legal process is already underway." A Republican member, tried to interject something about transparency. But Jasmine cut through it without raising her tone. If this were about transparency, you'd be holding a bipartisan hearing on Jared Kushner's Saudi deals, or Ivanka's trademarks in China. But you're not. She paused. Measured. Surgical. You're not here to find truth. You're here to find footage. A ripple moved through the gallery, not loud but present. Jasmine leaned back, resting her hands atop. Her notes as if she had nothing more to prove. Her eyes swept the panel again, catching the ones who avoided her gaze. The people I serve don't care about Hunter Biden's laptop. They care about rent, insulin, gun safety, voting rights. They care about justice that doesn't get scheduled for prime time. Bondi finally tried to recover, her voice a touch higher now. Congresswoman, no one is denying that these issues are important. Jasmine tilted her head, calm as ever. But they're not what you brought here today, are they? Bondi hesitated. No answer came, because there was none. Jasmine pressed on. This hearing was designed as a trigger, not a solution. You say Hunter Biden is evidence of corruption, but all you've brought is inference. Speculation, and a hard drive passed through more questionable hands than a political donation. Envelope. She let the silence breathe. The American people deserve better. They deserve truth that isn't filtered through a hashtag. The chairman finally leaned toward the mic uneasy. We'll remind members to stay within the scope of today's APSI. Jasmine raised one hand, not to object, but to finish. I am within scope, Mr. Chairman. I'm speaking directly to the degradation of what this committee was supposed to be. The room stilled again. Outside, cable news producers were already clipping the speech. Hashtags bloomed. TikTok captions loaded. Inside, Jasmine didn't grandstand. She just folded her binder shut and looked straight ahead. She wasn't winning an argument anymore. She was redefining the room. For a moment, the room sat in the false comfort of silence, as though the previous exchange had reached its natural endpoint. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't done, because this wasn't just about political theater. It was about something older, sharper, deeper, something written into the fabric of the UHL building itself. She sat perfectly still as she spoke, her voice even not cold, but deliberate, like someone naming a wound that everyone sees but refuses to acknowledge. This isn't new, she said. This tactic, this performance. Pam Bondi looked up, confused for half a second. And then Jasmine's gaze met hers and didn't waver. There's a pattern in this country, Jasmine continued, where black women in positions of power are constantly asked to answer for the actions of men they have never known, never defended, never stood beside. Whether it's a cousin, a colleague, or the president's son. Her hands stayed folded in front of her, controlled, not defensive. And every time we demand to be treated as individuals, as thinkers, as lawmakers, as human beings, the goalposts move. The standard shifts. We're not angry enough. We're too angry, too loud, too quiet, too emotional, too defiant. Oh, too much. She paused, letting the weight of that word to hang like smoke in the air. Pam Bondi's expression had changed now. Not outrage, not even irritation, just stillness. A realization that this moment was no longer about her. Jasmine leaned slightly forward. You didn't ask any of the white men on this panel to account for their party's scandals. Not one. Her eyes didn't leave Bondi's, but you looked at me, a black woman from Texas, and you thought I would be the softest target. You thought you could dangle the name Hunter Biden in front of me, and I'd fold under the pressure of proximity, of implication, of guilt by narrative. The room was silent again, but not neutral. It was brimming. I won't play that part, Jasmine said quietly, because I've seen this play before. She invoked names now, not as decoration, but as lineage. Shirley Chisholm was dismissed as unruly. Anita Hill was treated like a liar. Ketanji Brown Jackson was asked if she could define the word woman in front of a Senate panel, as if her brilliance could be reduced to a trap. A slight tremble in her voice, not fear, force. And now, in 2025, we're still putting black women on trial for other people's decisions. She sat back. I am not your symbol. I am not your scapegoat. I will not be your screen on which to project your discomfort with power that doesn't look like you. No one moved. No one dared. On social media, the moment was already immortalized. Commentators typed furiously. Young black girls watched with wide eyes, and older ones nodded with recognition. Inside the chamber, the hearing was no longer about Hunter Biden. It was about Jasmine Crockett and the long, brutal lineage of women who had sat in these rooms before her spoken truth, faced scorn, and refused to disappear. Pam Bondi sat still, her binder untouched, and Jasmine? She didn't need permission to keep speaking, because now, she wasn't speaking to them, she was speaking through them. The walls of the chamber had heard centuries of speeches righteous, rehearsed, and reckless. But what Jasmine Crockett delivered next wasn't a speech. It was a diagnosis. She let the silence sit, just long enough to make people uncomfortable. Then she exhaled, slow and sharp, like someone preparing to make a cut that could not be sewn shut. "I want to say this as plainly as possible," she began. "What's happening in this room today is not justice. It's content." Pam Bondi furrowed her brow but said nothing. The Republican bench grew still, again not silenced by force, but by something colder. Exposure. Jasmine pressed forward. "This isn't about oversight. It isn't about truth. It's about cameras, clips going viral. It's about who can land. The cleanest punch, not who can protect the public." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. This building, this institution, was built to write laws. Somewhere along the way, y'all started writing scripts. A flicker of movement from the far end of the panel, a staffer texting something urgent, another checking Twitter. "You turn hearings into hashtags," Jasmine continued. "Turn witnesses into villains. Turn complex policy into 10-second. Culture war bait. And you sell it to networks, to donors, to the people watching at home who think yelling is legislation." She leaned back for a moment as if giving them the chance to prove her wrong. No one did. This was supposed to be about the Department of Justice, about how we uphold legal ethics in a post-truth era. And yet, somehow, I've been pulled into a laptop conspiracy involving a man who has never held public office. She turned to Bondi again, not with anger, but with disappointment so sharp. It might as well have been fury. "You came here with preloaded sound bites. I was hoping I'd give you a moment to use on Hannity tonight." A few gasps, some shifting in chairs. But still, no one interrupted her. "And that's the game," Jasmine said. "You throw out bait, wait for someone like me to react. You cut the clip, add some dramatic music, post it on your social feeds, fundraise off the rage." She paused, and the truth. It never even makes the highlight reel. The room was now visibly tense. The Democrats quiet, the Republicans rigid, staffers frozen like chess pieces mid-match. "You aren't investigating crimes," she said. "You're producing episodes." Jasmine folded her arms not in defiance, but in authority. And if the American people are wondering why, Congress can't fix anything anymore, it's because we've stopped doing the work and started performing. The fight. For the first time, the chairman didn't reach for the gavel. No one asked her to yield. There was something in her tone, quiet, surgical, that commanded not just attention but reflection. Jasmine softened. "Just slightly, I ran for this seat to write policy, not punchlines." Her gaze swept the chamber one last time, and I will not sit here and become a character in someone else's fantasy about justice. Because the people I serve, they're not looking for a show. They're looking for results. Silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred, and somewhere beyond that room, in living rooms, classrooms, in comment sections, people began to understand something they hadn't fully seen before. The hearing wasn't about Hunter Biden, or even Jasmine Crockett. It was about the sickness infecting democracy itself. And Jasmine, she'd just named it out loud. There are few sounds more deafening than a room that expects a rebuttal and doesn't get one. After Jasmine Crockett's takedown, all eyes shifted to Pam Bondi, waiting for her to speak, to strike back, reclaim the room she'd once swaggered into with pre-written jabs and Fox News poise. But Pam froze, not in confusion and calculation, because in that sliver of dead air, she realized something. She had no comeback. Jasmine hadn't just dismantled her argument. She'd exposed the scaffolding behind it. And once the illusion shattered, all that was left was a microphone, a nation watching, and the sound of Bondi's breathing, clipped in shallow. She adjusted her jacket. A nervous twitch disguised as confidence cleared her throat. Looked toward the chairman, but no one came to rescue her. This was no longer theater. The curtain had been yanked back, the lights too harsh to hide behind. A camera lens zoomed in. Somewhere, a producer whispered, "Stay on her." Not for words. For the spectacle of defeat. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk or lean back with satisfaction. She simply remained still, letting the truth do what truth does best, echo without needing amplification. Bondi finally reached for her notepad, flipping pages that had once been weapons, talking points, rehearsed lines. But every word now felt hollow paper shields against a storm of sincerity. She tried to speak. "Congresswoman," she began, voice low, brittle. But Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't have to. Pam hesitated. The sentence never came. Not because she lost her place, but because she realized her place had shifted. Once the aggressor, she was now the spectacle, a witness to her own unraveling, I think. Bondi tried again, glancing down, then up. "I think we've gone far afield of the topic at hand." It was the safest move she could find, a retreat masquerading as parliamentary order. But even that lifeline was too thin to hold. Representative Garcia leaned forward. "With all due respect," he said slowly, "I believe the topic is how. These hearings have become political sideshows." Bondi's expression cracked, not in anger, in exposure. For years, she'd thrived in partisan media, where pushback was predictable and stage-managed. But here now, with the nation watching and her usual rhythm shattered, the limits of her tactics became painfully visible. She blinked rapidly. Another attempt to steady herself. "I've served in law enforcement for years," she muttered, almost to herself. "I cared deeply about integrity." Jasmine tilted her head, not mocking, just observing. Like a surgeon watching scar tissue retract from a blade, Pam fumbled for dignity. Hunter Biden's behavior raises questions. But no one was listening to that name anymore. The courtroom had moved on. The public had moved on. Even the panelists on her own side had begun to check their phones, their eyes avoiding her space. It wasn't defeat by knockout, it was abandonment by relevance. The chairman finally intervened. "We will move forward," he said, not to spare Bondi, but to spare the process itself. Jasmine looked down, pen in hand, scribbling something on her notes. It could have been a reminder, or a prayer, or nothing at all. Pam Bondi said no more. The silence that followed wasn't her choice, was the verdict, and it would linger far longer than any shouting match could. The courtroom had quieted, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't done, because words are wind, but receipts are anchors. She flipped through her folder, not with haste, but with a surgeon's calm precision. Her fingers moved over the tabs. Ukraine smear. Foreign business hypocrisy. Fox News falsehoods, each one a pressure point Bondi never saw coming. Then she held it up, a single printed page, enlarged for the record. An excerpt from a 2019 Politico article, highlighted in yellow. Sharp as a blade. "Mr. Chairman," Jasmine said, voice cool, "I'd like to submit this report, which details Pam Bondi's own participation in lobbying foreign interests, including work tied to Qatar while she served as a Trump ally after. Her tenure as Florida Ag." Gasps. Soft, scattered, but unmistakable. Pam stiffened. Eyes narrowed. She hadn't expected that, not because it wasn't true, but because she thought no one would bring it here. Jasmine continued without flinching. "Let's be clear. The issue here is not foreign entanglements. The issue is selective outrage. If Hunter Biden deserves scrutiny for business dealings, then so does every political figure who's profited from similar ambiguity, including Ms. Bondi." A murmur ran through the chamber. No one interrupted her now, and for the record, she added, holding up another page this time. Quote from the DOJ's own review: "There is no ongoing federal prosecution against Hunter Biden for corruption or collusion tied to his father's actions? Bondi opened her mouth, then shut it. She could challenge opinion, but not documentation.
Ash.
And Jasmine wasn't offering opinion. She was filing evidence. Crockett's voice dropped into something tighter, sharper. This isn't about Hunter. It never was. It's about deflection. It's about silencing women who speak back. Women like me, who ask the wrong questions at the wrong time and don't know when to sit down. Her gaze swept the room. I won't sit down. Silence. Even her political opponents didn't dare break it. A Republican congressman, one who'd nodded along earlier when Bondi spoke, shifted. Awkwardly in his chair, the camera panned to him. His discomfort told its own story. Crockett walked it in, point by point. Like a trial lawyer delivering closing arguments. Pam Bondi has never cross-examined Jared Kushner's billion-dollar deals with the Saudis. She said she's never investigated Ivanka's trademarks secured in China while Trump was negotiating trade policy. Why? Because the outrage isn't real. It's weaponized. And I will not be its target. It wasn't fury. It was precision. And that made it even more dangerous. She laid the final document on the desk before her. Printed timeline, dated, sourced, with footnotes to clean to ignore. This hearing was supposed to be about oversight, she said. Let's start with overseeing our own hypocrisy. A beat passed, then applause. Not from everyone, not from the chairman, but from the gallery. Quiet, sharp, emotional. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes. A young staffer nodded slowly. Not even realizing he was doing it, Bondi looked down, staring at the table, as if it might offer her shelter. But it didn't, because Crockett hadn't just defended herself, she'd flipped the courtroom. The focus had shifted permanently. The audience in person and watching nationwide had seen the sleight of hand exposed. And there was no going back. No gavel strike could contain what just happened. Crockett didn't ask for acknowledgement. She didn't need it. She simply returned to her seat, her hands calm, her papers in order, as if to say, you don't need to yell to win. You just need the truth, the guts to put it on the record. There was no official verdict, no gavel, no headline that could capture what had really shifted in that hearing room. But the silence told the truth, and truth doesn't need permission to echo. Jasmine Crockett sat still, back straight, eyes forward, but you could feel the aftershock radiating from her like heat from coals. Not rage, not even satisfaction, just certainty, that rarest of energies in politics. Pam Bondi hadn't spoken since the documents hit the desk. She'd folded in on herself, not dramatically, not with a fall. Quietly diminished, a woman who walked in with scripts had been undone by a woman who walked in with receipts. And the chamber felt different now. It wasn't just the energy. It was the weight. The way eyes shifted. The way everyone from interns in the back row to seasoned committee members avoided contact with Bondi and leaned unconsciously toward. Crockett, like gravity, had changed direction. The chairman cleared his throat. I believe we've concluded testimony for today. It was mechanical, hollow, because no procedural phrase could undo what had just happened. The hearing had ended, but something deeper had just begun. A rebalancing. No one clapped. No one moved to hug Jasmine or shake Bondi's hand. The moment had moved past theater. It had entered something else, something raw, almost sacred. It was the kind of silence that follows truth when it has nowhere else left to go but inside you. Few members gathered their papers. Cameras blinked red. Staffers whispered. Didn't move. She stared forward like a woman who had seen the future, survived it. It was in that stillness that the real verdict landed, not as a ruling, but as a reckoning, because the point wasn't just that Crockett won. The point was how she hadn't outshouted anyone. She didn't smear, mock, or exaggerate. She didn't cry or beg or contort herself for sympathy. She refused to bend. And in a system built on bending to power, to privilege, to the convenient fiction of decorum that was revolutionary. Pam Bondi rose slowly. She didn't look at Jasmine. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked somewhere between the floor and nowhere. Her notes remained scattered. Her phone buzzed. She didn't answer. She'd lost something more valuable than an argument. She'd lost the illusion that she could control the room by showing up. Crockett, meanwhile, stood quietly. No dramatics. No fist pump. She simply collected her papers, the very papers that had done what years of headlines and hearings had failed to do: force a reckoning with the truth. A journalist in the gallery whispered to another. She didn't just win the debate, she rewrote the rules. And outside that chamber, things were already shifting. Clips were being posted the moment Bondi froze. The documents Crockett laid down. The line oversee our own hypocrisy already trending. But inside, the chamber time seemed to move slower, not because anything was physically different, but because something moral had snapped into alignment. This was no longer a debate about Hunter Biden. It was no longer about Pam Bondi or talking points, or even political advantage. It was about what happens when a black woman, who is expected to stay silent, decides instead to speak with fire, with facts, and with the unshakable dignity of someone who knows the system was never built for her, but who will challenge it anyway. Jasmine Crockett walked out last, not because she was being dramatic, but because history sometimes waits a moment before following the ones who move it.